Bienvenidos a Aprendamos Español 2. Yo soy Dr. Dan Viamonte, su maestro de Español 2. Now, last time we covered the verbs ser and estar and its uses. We introduced new vocabulary from the cuaderno on page 4 and on page 8. We listened and talked about bailo con un bulto. Remember, that was the folk tale from New Mexico in your Dime Dos book, pages 22 through 24. We reviewed the items in the present tense verbs AR, ER, and IR, regular verbs. We reviewed bringing your notebook up to date. We practiced your vocabulary, and we taught you how to do flashcards. We gave examples on how to do the homework for this week. Facilitator, would you please collect the homework number 1 and number 3? Check to see students did the flashcards, but don't collect these, please. These should help the students study and review their vocabulary. Now, the lesson today will conclude Unidad 1, Lección 2 in your Dime Dos textbook. We shall introduce this week the common stem-changing verbs. These are the ones that the E changes to IE, the O changes to UE, the U changes to UE, and the E changes to I. We will also look at irregular verbs in the yo form. They only change in the yo form. We'll take a look at ¿Qué decimos?, the telenovela, on page 25 through 27 of our textbook. We're going to be looking at un poema de bien conocido poeta chicano, a well-known Mexican poet, Francisco X. Alarcón. And then we will learn a little bit about El Paso, Texas. Let's make a list in our notebooks of the verbs listed as common stem-changing verbs. Remember, we're talking about present tense where the E changes to IE. An example would be querer, to want or to wish. It's the E that will change to IE. The O changes to UE, like encontrar, to find. The O changes to UE. In jugar, to play, remember we're talking games here or activities, the U is what changes to UE. And in the E to I, as in the verb pedir, to ask for, the E changes to I. So we're looking at changing the verbs, the stem, in the present tense. Our first set of verbs that change are the E to IE. If you'll write down in your notebook the verbs that are stem-changing verbs from E to IE. Cerrar, to close. Cerrar. Comenzar. Comenzar, to begin. Despertarse, to wake up. Despertarse. Divertirse, to amuse oneself. Distract or entertain. Empezar, to begin. Entender, to understand. Pensar, to think. Perder, to lose. Preferir, to prefer. Querer, to want or to wish. Recomendar, to recommend. Sentar, sentarse, to sit down. Sentir, to feel. Now, these are the verbs that you need to learn where the stem changes. The next set of verbs are the O to UE, where in the stem the O of the verb changes to UE. Let's begin. Acostarse, to go to bed. Acostarse. The O changes to UE. Almorzar, to have lunch. The O changes to UE. Contar, to tell. The O changes to UE. Costar, to cost. The O changes to UE. Doler, the O changes to UE. Dormir, to sleep. The O changes to UE. Encontrar, the O changes to UE. Morir, the O changes to UE. Poder, the O changes to UE. Probar, to taste. The O changes to UE. Recordar, the O changes to UE. And volver, the O changes to UE. These verbs are the ones where the O changes to UE in the stem. Next, we want to look at the U to UE verbs. We have jugar. You'll find jugar conjugated on page 30 of your textbook. You'll find on the left-hand column the stem-changing verb jugar. Notice that the U changes to UE. And so it becomes juego, juegas, juega, jugamos, juegan. Notice that in the first person plural, the U remains. We also have a list of verbs where the E, instead of changing to IE, changes to I. Conseguir. The E changes to I. It means to get and to obtain. Pedir, to ask for or to request. The E changes to I. Repetir. The second E changes to I. Seguir. The E changes to I. Means to follow. Servir. To serve. The E changes to I. And vestir, vestirse, to get dressed, the E changes to I. When you need to conjugate these irregular verbs into first person singular, second person singular, third person singular, first person plural, or third person plural, follow the example in the box on page G11. Facilitator, could you please help the students find in Dime Dos, the textbook, page G11. Notice that in the stem changing verbs, in the column to the left, the E to IE, the example is empezar, empiezo, empiezas, empieza. Now we go to the first person plural, empezamos. The IE does not change, so it stays to E, empezamos. And then to the third person plural, empiezan. So the only place it does not change is in the first person plural. Otherwise, the endings are the same for AR verbs, O, AS, A, AMOS, AN. But in the stem changing verbs, the E changes to IE except in the first person plural. Let's take a look at contar. Here where the O changes to UE. Cuento. Notice that the O has changed to UE and we add the regular yo ending, the O. Cuento, cuentas, cuenta. First person singular, second person singular, third person singular. Now, when we go to the first person plural, notice again that the O does not change. It's contamos, C-O-N-T-A-M-O-S. And then for the third person plural, cuentan, it does change. So again, the stem changing verbs will change in the first, second, and third person singular and in the third person plural. It remains the same in the first person plural. For the E to I, like the verb pedir, notice that it becomes pido, pides, pide. The E has changed to an I, and you have the regular endings for an IR verb, O-E-S-E. In the first person plural, it does not change, and it stays P-E-D, pedimos, with the regular I-M-O-S ending for the first person plural. Again, it changes for the third person plural. The E becomes an I, and it becomes piden. So once again, it's pido, pides, pide, does not change, pedimos, and piden. So as you can see on page G11, it gives you an example of how to conjugate those verbs. To practice, let's do for homework number 1, the next page, G12, exercise A. So if you'll turn to G12, exercise A, let's read together the instructions. Los sábados. Miquela acaba de escribir una carta sobre sus actividades. She has just finished writing a letter about her activities. Personaliza la carta, personalize the letter un poco, a little bit, más, more, usando yo, using the yo form as the subject instead of the nosotros form. So as you look at the letter and you find the verb that is in italics form, that verb has to change from the first person plural to the first person singular. Now remember, we want you to complete these as homework. That's page G12, exercise A. Now, some verbs in Spanish are just irregular verbs only in the yo form, the I form. Let's turn in our books, the Dime Dos, to page 31. The rest of the conjugation form in the present tense is the same. Let's take a look at the verbs. Conocer. The first person plural changes to conozco. Then the rest is the same. Dar, to give, it would be doy. Decir, to tell or to say, digo. Hacer, to do or make, becomes hago. Oír, to hear, becomes oigo. Poner, to put or to place, becomes pongo. Saber, to know, information, becomes sé, con acento, with the accent mark. Sé. Salir, to leave, salgo, salgo. Tener, to have. Tener becomes tengo. Traer, to bring, becomes traigo. Venir, to come, vengo. And ver, to see, becomes veo. I wish I could tell you there's an easy shortcut to remember these, but there is no easy shortcut. You will have to memorize these verbs. These are known as irregular verbs. Now let's practice. Go to the textbook and let's practice on page 30. So on page 30, activity E, 1 through 6. Remember, read the instructions first. Always read the instructions before answering the questions. Then write the correct conjugated form of the verb. Let me review the first one with you. In the textbook, number 1. A las 7:30, camino a la escuela y, and now we're looking for the verb pensar. Remember, pensar means to think. But stop a moment. Let's look up this verb pensar in the back of the textbook. Did you discover that in the back of the textbook? Well, let's take a look. Page C4. Facilitator, would you please help the students find page C4? It's labeled on C4 Appendix 2. Appendix 2. Now, as you can tell, they have conjugated the more common verbs for you. Right now on this page, we're looking only at the present indicative tense. Do you see the verbs? Cantar, correr, subir. Notice that these are listed under the heading of regular verbs. What that means is that for the AR verb, you take the AR off and you add O, AS, A, AMOS, and AN. Remember, for ER, you would add O, ES, E, EMOS, and EN. And for the IR verb, you add the O, the ES, the E, the IMOS, and the EN. Regular endings for regular verbs. And if you look under present indicative, you will see it conjugated. It says, canto, cantas, canta, cantamos, cantan. Corro, corres, corre, corremos, corren. Subo, subes, sube. Subimos, suben. Now if you'll turn to page C6. So turn one page more. And there you will find under category 2, stem changing verbs. Again, these are infinitives in AR and ER, and you'll notice that you'll see for the present and indicative, pensar. Now they show you that what happens in the verb pensar, the E changes to IE. So let's conjugate pensar. Yo pienso. Tú piensas. Él piensa. Nosotros pensamos. Remember, it doesn't change in that first person plural. And in the third person plural, piensan. You'll notice that the regular endings O, AS, A, AMS, AMOS, and AN. Now for the ER verb, volver. Notice that we're talking about the first O changing to UE. Vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve. Volvemos, vuelven. And for the verb jugar, the U changes to UE. Juego, juegas, juega. Jugamos, juegan. So you see on page C6, you will find the irregular verb pensar conjugated. Now, why did I want pienso? I want the first person singular. Why? Because the original statement that started this search for verbs, the sentence said, I am thinking about my classes. So the I is pienso. Now, while we're here in the back of our book, you may want to take a quick look at the irregular verbs. And that's found on page C7. Now, these are the irregular verbs. Again, we're only looking right now at the present tense. So as you see the verbs, and you should recognize some of these now, they are conjugated for you in the present indicative. Okay? So as you can tell in the back of your book, it will give you some wonderful examples on how to conjugate regular verbs, how to conjugate irregular verbs, and how to conjugate stem-changing verbs. Okay, let's go back to page 30 in our Dime Dos, which is where we were before we went looking for the verbs. Remember, we're working on activity E. Be sure to determine what form of yo, tú, usted, él, or ella, nosotros or nosotras, ustedes, ellos, ellas, that you want to use. Now, let's review the instructions for activity E. Según Tere, ¿qué pasa todos los días? What happens every day? So let's take a look at number 1. Let me do number 1 for you again. A las 7:30, camino a la escuela y, now I want the first person singular of pensar, pienso en mis clases. Who was thinking? I was. The verb is pensar. I use pienso. I'd like you to do the remaining 2 through 6 as homework assignment number 2. So please jot it down in your notebook. Now, let's turn to the next episode of the telenovela ¿Qué decimos? In this episode, we continue with the same characters, Tina and Margarita. In this episode, they're going shopping downtown. While they're shopping downtown, they meet Daniel and Mateo, and the boys give the girls some ribbing about doing shopping. Margarita finds something in Daniel's shirt pocket. While they're sitting down and having some refreshments, Daniel explains. Let's watch together. Remember, follow along as we watch the videotape.
Al andar de compras. 1. ¿Le gustan los collares? Tina y Margarita están de compras en un centro comercial.
Ya casi tengo todo. Tú también, ¿no? Compraste muchísimo. Sí, ¿verdad? Y todavía tengo que buscarle un regalo a mi mamá. Estoy tan preocupada porque el lunes es su santo y todavía no tengo nada para ella. ¿Le gustan los collares? Están en oferta en esa joyería. Buena idea. A mi mamá le encanta la joyería de fantasía. Le puedo comprar un lindo juego de collar y aretes. Gracias, Tina. Siempre tienes ideas tan buenas.
Dos. Mamá prefiere el rojo.
¿Qué piensas de estos collares? Me encanta el azul. Pues mamá prefiere el rojo, pero tiene un vestido blanco y el azul combina bien con el blanco, ¿no? Claro. Ay, mira, una pulsera y aretes también. Un juego completo. Son perfectos. ¿A cuánto están? Están en oferta. Todo está rebajado en un 20%. Deja calcularlo. El juego completo te sale en $24 más el impuesto. No está mal. Me los llevo. Estoy segura que le van a gustar a mi mamá.
3. ¿Qué hacen por aquí?
Estoy tan contenta. Me encantan mis compras. En particular el regalo para mamá.
¿Qué compras otra vez? ¿Queda algo en las tiendas para nosotros? ¿O ya se lo compraron todo?
Hola, Mateo, Daniel. ¿Qué pasa, muchachos? ¿Qué hacen por aquí?
Probablemente lo mismo que ustedes. Yo busco una chaqueta y Mateo... Cuidado con Mateo porque anda de mal humor.
No sé qué me pasa. Echo de menos las vacaciones. No puedo creer que las clases ya comenzaron.
Tu problema es que tienes química con el profesor mate estudiantes.
No, no es eso.
Oye, Daniel, ¿y esta carta de quién es?
Es de mi amigo venezolano.
¿Tu amigo venezolano?
4. ¿De qué se escriben?
No sabía que tenías amigos en Venezuela.
Es un amigo por correspondencia. Es muy simpático.
¿Y de qué se escriben?
Hablamos de nuestras familias y amigos y actividades. Por ejemplo, esta vez me dice que juega béisbol, que va frecuentemente al cine y que le gusta comer al aire libre.
¿Y es guapo? ¿No te preguntas si tienes amigas simpáticas como nosotras?
Lo siento, pero no. Solo quiere saber qué hago los fines de semana, si salgo frecuentemente, qué películas me gustan, cuál es mi música favorita, si me gustan los deportes y cosas así.
¿Y ya le contestaste?
Todavía no, pienso hacerlo esta noche.
Pues le tienes que contar de tus amigas.
Now that you've had a chance to see the telenovela, would you please turn to page 28, Activity B. I'd like you to do this as homework number 3. That's questions 1 through 8. Be sure to read the instructions. Also for homework, and this is item number 4 for homework, in your cuaderno, exercise A on page 5 and 6. Facilitator, would you please help them open up their cuadernos to page 5? And on activity A, do only the odd numbers, 1, 3, and 5. Only the odd ones on page 5. Then if you turn the page to page 6, activity C, make sure you read the instructions. We want you to write the correct form of the verbs that are in parenthesis. Write the verbs only, 1 through 16. Now we'd like you to take a look at a poem that's on page 35 of Dime Dos, your textbook. Francisco X. Alarcón. Now this is a poet in his 40s. Yes, I'm a poet first and then a teacher. When I'm not a teaching, well, I'm not eating, I'm a poet. I'm a poet all the time. I think. Oh, Alarcón said in a recent interview, when asked to discuss his bilingual book of poetry, Laughing Tomatoes and Other Spring Poems. These are children's poems in a children's book press in 1997. Now, the 20 poems that are written in both English and Spanish are brightly illustrated by Maya Cristina Gonzalez. Now, Alarcón's adult side directs the Spanish for Native Speakers program at the University of California in Davis, California. I've been here some 5 years, he said. He is the author of 7 books of poetry and co-author of several textbooks for Spanish speakers. But this book, Laughing Tomatoes, it's aimed at children. he thinks he's onto something very cultural, very wonderful. He says, I celebrate tomatoes and corn and chiles, the season, nature. Laughing tomatoes is a celebration of life. We have to become like vegetables, like trees, to accept water and life. Well, I really believe that poetry is magical. And when you read my poetry, you have to find new ways of looking at yourself, at the universe. You know, poetry can communicate feelings that everyday speech cannot. I think I relate to children in the 3rd and 4th grades best because they are natural poets. Oh, I learn so much from children. I teach creative writing right here in California at the university. And let me tell you, I don't want to say too much, but 3rd graders, they are better poets. They make connections and metaphors. They take risks and go for broke, and they open up. Now, the very first poem in the book that he has written has to be read upside down. It's a quirk that children love. A poem makes us see everything for the first time. Or in Spanish, un poema nos hace ver todo por primera vez. Now, he also writes about his grandmothers. His maternal grandmother appears in Laughing Tomatoes. Here you have a woman who suffered a great deal, moving from Mexico to the United States in 1919. And then, during the Great Depression in 1931, she went back to Mexico. And yet, she was happy within herself. She was the one who really raised me. I had a lot of fun with my grandmother. Now, Alarcón, he grew up both in the United States and in Mexico. Yes, I consider myself binational, he says. In fact, my family has been binational for 4 generations. He reads a poem about his roots. I carry my roots with me all the time. Rolled up, I use them as my pillow. Going back to his Mexican village regularly is important to Alarcón. He recalled his summers there, growing up in a time and a place where there was no TV. Oh, we sat around and we listened to stories night after night, and we went to bed with our heads full of those stories, he said. Now the village has radio and TV. Oh, I'm concerned about the loss of the oral tradition. And for a while, I was also concerned about Chicano writing. Oh, I was worried, thinking there were no writers in the generation behind me. But I think the problem was there were no avenues. When I was at Stanford, there were at least 50 Chicano literary magazines, which don't exist anymore. But in the past few years, well, there has been a wealth of Chicano writing. Well, I'm not writing a novel. I write some fiction. But poetry is enough for me. And after going to those 14 schools and seeing those children this past year and the tremendous need they have for bilingual books, I've made a commitment that I want to continue doing this for the next several years. Now, he mourns the fact that there are so few original bilingual books for kids. I want to retain my native tongue, Spanish, and the native Indian language of my village, too, he says. Now that you know something about the poet, Francisco X. Alarcón, would you turn to page 35 if you're not there already? And I want you to read along with me. Now, the nice thing about poetry is that you can read the poem in many different ways. Let's begin. First day of school. Frente a la teacher. Notice that he uses the English word for teacher. Apriete más fuerte. La mano de mi abuela, la teacher, se sonrió y dijo algo raro en inglés. Mi abuela luego me dio su benedicción y se fue. Yo me quedé hecho silla en un mundo muy extraño. Now, when you read this poem, you may want to read it differently. For example, frente a la teacher apriete más fuerte la mano de mi abuela, la teacher se sonría y dijo algo raro en inglés. Mi abuela luego me dio su benedicción y se fue. Yo me quedé hecho silla en un mundo muy extraño. When you read poetry out loud to yourself, and you should read it out loud, you may have to do it 3 or 4 times until you find the right cadence and the right rhythm that's perfect for the poem and perfect for you. Now let's go back and see if we can translate what the poem says. Frente a la teacher, in front of the teacher. Apriete más fuerte. Work harder. Squeeze harder. La mano de mi abuela, the hand of my grandmother. La teacher, the teacher, se sonrió, smiled. Y dijo algo raro en inglés, and said something rare in English. Mi abuela, my grandmother, luego me dio, later gave me, su benedicción, her benediction. Y se fue, and she left. Yo me quedé, I stayed, hecho silla, sitting. En un mundo, in a world, muy extraño, very strange. Interesting poem. You know, we talked about the fact that he likes to write about children, and he writes about his grandmother. She appears in this poem. He wants to hold on to his roots, even though he is in a world that's bilingual, bilingue. And in a bilingual world, you'll find that sometimes you interchange Spanish with English. But if you want to become a true Hispanic, you hold on to those dreams of the language. First Day of School by Francisco X. Alarcón. How many of you have ever visited El Paso, Texas? Do you know where it is? Why don't we turn at the moment to page 18 in Dime Dos. Page 18. Facilitator, could you please help us find page 18? You'll notice that when you get to page 18, the title is El Paso del Norte, una breve historia, a brief history. I wonder if we know very much about El Paso. Do you know that it was a region that was there long before the United States became the United States? In fact, the history of El Paso, the area, stems over 400 years. How old is the United States? Well, we know it's over 225 years old. We celebrated the Constitution in the year 1789. So it's twice as old as the United States. Well, once in El Paso area, there were very proud Indians roaming the hills and the valleys along the river. Franciscan padres, remember that the Hispanics are predominantly Católicos, Catholic, and the Franciscan Padres are very common to the area. And they traveled this country on foot. The Spanish conquistadores that came from Spain in shining armor and on horseback on their quest for gold and for land, for the crown of Spain, were rough and tough. There were also vaqueros, cowboys that roamed that land. Some of them were gunslingers. You've heard of those. They were in our Wild West. The El Paso area had gunslingers. Settlers from the east were searching for new lands and new homes. Gamblers and adventurers were looking for excitement. And of course, the dashing young men from the U.S. Cavalry protecting this new land were also in this area. For over 400 years, El Paso was known as the Pass of the North, and it has been a favorite stop and destination for visitors from all over the world. When some 400 years ago the first Spaniards crossed the Rio Grande on their way north, recorded history at the Pass of the North began. Of course, the area on the river had already been home to Indians for many centuries. Very few areas in the United States have such a rich heritage and such colorful and exciting background as the El Paso area. If you look on a map, you'll find that El Paso can be found in the southern western edge of the state of Texas, and it borders New Mexico and the country of Mexico. Many people have visited El Paso area because of its natural beauty, its parks, its sunny weather, and festive occasions. Some of you may have heard of the famous Sun Carnival. And of course, many of us watch the Sun Bowl, the football game. Now there's a river that separates Texas from Mexico. It's called the Rio Grande, or the Rio Bravo. It's the same river, but it depends on which side of the border you're standing on. If you're on the side of the United States, it's known as the Rio Grande. When you're standing on the Mexican side looking at the United States, it's called the Rio Bravo. So if you hear Rio Bravo or Rio Grande, they're talking about the same river. Now, some of those places of interest. There's a wonderful state park that people go to from all over the country. It's called the Franklin Mountain State Park. Have any of you been there? There's miles of hiking and picnic areas, and there's wonderful terrain for hiking and walking. The second place of interest, something known as the Carlsbad Caverns. Some of you have been there? These are world famous caverns. In fact, they are among the largest caves in the Western Hemisphere. They're 20 miles of underground corridors. Between May and October, tens of thousands of bats exist in the cave in a swarm to feed on insects. And people come from all over to see the thousands and thousands of bats. The legend of El Paso. First, there was the ancient Rio Grande, occasionally dry, sometimes overflowing from the rains. It created a bosque, swamps, and thickets 5 miles wide in the El Paso valleys. 1,000 or so years ago, Indians began to appear. The Spanish call them sumas and mansos. They were a small, wiry, friendly type of people who lived right along the river. 12 Spaniards came through in 1581. 3 priests, and 9 soldiers, taking God to this New Mexico. The first European penetration of what we know as El Paso, Southwest, was now history. In 1598, Juan de Onate left Santa Barbara, Chihuahua, with 500 colonists. They celebrated the first Thanksgiving in the United States at today's San Elizario, Texas, on April 30th. 4 days later, they crossed the Rio Grande, naming the ford El Paso del Rio Norte, the pass across the River of the North. As a name, El Paso was now on the map. Onate's trek ended the final portion of El Camino Real, the royal road that went from Mexico City all the way to Santa Fe. At 1,600 miles in length, for over 2 centuries, it was the longest highway in North America. In 1659, El Paso del Norte was built around the mission Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. The city is now called Juarez. The northern New Mexico Pueblo revolt of 1680 swept 2,000 Spanish refugees before it let El Paso pass. Tiega and Piro Indians arrived, and the Spanish established the Iselta and Socorro Misiones right there. Downtown El Paso, well, that began about 1827 at Ponce's Rancho. 2 days after Christmas in 1846, Colonel Alexander Donaphan and his Missouri farm boys captured El Paso del Norte. Ponce's Rancho passed on to the United States and became Franklin. The town was part of New Mexico, and the Rio Grande became the international boundary between the states and Mexico. Fort Bliss opened in the downtown area, the first of 6 eventual locations. Thousands of 49ers passed through, as did the Butterfield Overland Stage. 49ers were people who were searching for gold. Franklin voted to join Texas in 1850, and the state's present boundaries were established. In 1859, Franklin became El Paso, Texas. In Spanish, you would say Texas. The railroads arrived in 1881, and the town boomed. The 4 dead in 5 seconds gunfight. Oh yes, there was a gunfight called and remembered as the 4 dead in 5 seconds. Exploded at the intersection of El Paso and San Antonio streets in 1881 in April. In 1895, John Wesley Hardin, history's ugliest and deadliest gunfighter, was slain by John Selman in the Acme Saloon. El Paso del Norte became Juarez in 1888, and from 1910 to 1930, the Mexican Revolution raged with Juarez changing hands 6 times. Pancho Villa, you may have heard of Pancho Villa. He lived at 609 North Oregon Street in El Paso. Today, you know El Paso for the University of Texas at El Paso, which began in 1914, and it began as the College of Mines and Metallurgy. It was the world's greatest and finest collection of Bhutanese architecture outside of the country Bhutan. Today, with a population of over 600,000 people, with a 400-year collage of history, El Paso is finally recognized as the strength and importance of its colorful and varied past. We covered a lot of material. We covered the stem-changing verbs. Remember the stem-changing verbs, the E to IE, the O to UE, the U to UE, and the E to I. We covered irregular verbs that only change in the yo form. We conjugated verbs by finding them in the back of Dime Dos. We took a look at the telenovela, the continuing soap opera, Que Decimos. We told you something about Francisco X. Alarcón, the poet, the Mexican poet. We practiced some of the vocabulary, and we hope that you'll add these to flashcards. We talked about El Paso, the region of El Paso, as well as the city in Texas and in Mexico. Now we want you to do your homework. So remember to do homework number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Remember, until next time, excellence in academics and excellence in behaviors makes for a terrific student. Muchas gracias. Adiós.